What happens when you add a turbo to a stock 4.8, or a cammed 5.3, or twins on a 6-liter? Does your 4.8 liter need more torque? Just add boost. How do you take a cammed 5.3 liter and make 900 horsepower? Just add boost. And if one turbo is good, what happens when you add twins?
Hello everybody, I'm Richard Holdner, and as always, welcome to the channel. Today we're asking, what's it worth? And today we're looking at turbos. That's right. How much power is a turbo worth, or turbos, if you run twins? And the answer is always, it depends. It depends on the size of the motor, the original power output, the size of the turbo or turbos in case you use twins, and how much boost. So what we're going to do for this video is I'm going to start off with something very mild, like a 4.8 liter, kind of a stock one, just add a turbo. And then we're going to end with something really wild, like a twin turbo 6-liter run all the way up. And then we'll cover something in between. So check it out. Okay guys, let's jump right in on our turbo combination. What's it worth? And we're going to start off on the low end of the spectrum, because with the turbo combination, you can start off small and have low boost and make not very much power, or you can put big twin turbos on a bigger motor, turn the boost all the way up and make 1,000,000 horsepower, and then everything else kind of falls in between there. So we'll start off on the low end of the spectrum. In that case, we're looking at the 4.8 liter LS. That's the smallest motor that they made in that engine family. It powered lots of trucks. It was a base engine for a lot of stuff. And of all of the combinations, of all the LS combinations, the 4.8 liter, we would argue that it needs torque more than the others. It's obviously down on torque compared to the larger 5.3 and 6.0 and 6.2 versions. And that's often the complaint of the 4.8 liter guys that have them in trucks. They're like, yeah, the 4.8 is a good motor, but all of them would want more torque, particularly in a truck for towing. So that's one thing that a turbo does. So let's take a look at a combination that I put together where we ran a single turbo on a 4.8. Otherwise, it was stock, and show you how much power you can get from that. And obviously, we can vary the boost a little bit to change the power output. But we'll start there and then kind of work our way up to more and more powerful combos. So starting with our 4.8 liter, this was a Junkyard 4.8 liter. It was an LR4. Everything was stock on it. It had the stock bottom end. It did have ring gap in it. It had stock 706 heads. It had the stock factory 4.8 liter LR4 camshaft that it shares with the LM7. It had the factory truck intake manifold and factory size throttle body. We ran it with long tube headers. We put bigger injectors in it because we were going to add boost. The dyno has a big enough pump and all that. We ran it with a Holley HP management system, and then we ran it naturally aspirated, and then we added our single turbo kit. So run naturally aspirated are basically stock 4.8 liter LR4 with long tube headers and obviously no accessories and no inlet and all that, so it makes more power than it's rated at. But it made 329 horsepower and 335 foot-pounds of torque. And here's what happened when we added a single turbo to this combination. You can see power curve looks very similar to the stock one. It makes peak power basically the same spot, and depending on whether or not you have a rising or falling boost curve can dictate that. This was a small GT45 turbo. We used the stock truck manifolds on it. We only ran about 8 pounds of boost on this thing. We did run it on E85, so we were able, and we had our little ProCharger air-to-water intercooler on here. And that combination, the low boost and the intercooler and E85, we ran 21 degrees of timing with this thing, and it made good power. You could see running just over 8 pounds of boost. Our little turbo 4.8 liter produced 524 horsepower and 529 foot-pounds of torque. And you can see, basically, there's just boost and torque and power everywhere, even on an otherwise stock 4.8 liter. Now you could run less boost than this. You could run more boost than this. You could easily make over 600 horsepower with the stock camshaft. You're running it in the same effective RPM range, although we ran this all the way out to 6,500 RPM. You can see the little 4.8 liter starting with basically any stock LS, including the little 4.8 liter, add boost to it, and good things happen. Okay, guys, we're taking a look at our stock 4.8 liter and adding a turbo, find out what happens. You know, obviously we gain good power, but what happens if we go up both in displacement and naturally aspirated power output by adding a camshaft? So we did exactly that on a slightly larger 5.3 liter, also very common in the wrecking yards. We chose an LM7, which is an iron 5.3 liter with a 706 head, and the same truck intake manifold. It's basically the 5.3 version of that smaller 4.8 liter. Has the same camshaft, has the same cylinder heads, has the same intake manifold, and the same compression because they use a flat top piston on the 4.8. So all we've done basically is go up in displacement. So we ran it the same way, zero electric water pump, long tube headers, open throttle body, you know, no accessories, all of that stuff. So we ran our stock 5.3 liter. It produced 354 horsepower and 381 foot-pounds of torque. The first thing that we did on this, we actually ran it with a turbo with a stock camshaft as well. But the first thing we did is we installed one of my own low buck truck camshafts available at richardholdnerperformance.com. Good camshaft, good daily driver camshaft, works with a stock converter, but also adds quite a bit of power and also is really good for low speed boost response because it adds so much low speed power. And I'll go ahead and put the specs up here for you. 553 lift, 212, 220 something duration, and 107-degree lobe separation angle. But with that camshaft on our 5.3, push power up to 421, 422 horsepower. It did very well. Peak torque was also way up, which is, you see, good gains pretty much everywhere. 417 foot-pounds of torque. So as we know by now, if you've ever watched this channel, you know that every camshaft is a turbo cam. Obviously, we ran it with a stock one, which was never designed to run boost on the 4.8, and it's the same camshaft on the 5.3. But also this camshaft, like most of them, work very well. All it does is multiply whatever's there. And since we have a nice solid power curve with the low buck truck camshaft, here's what happened when we added a turbo to this combination. This was about 7.3 or 7.4 pounds. We're up over 600 horsepower, 629 horsepower. Peak torque is also way up for this combination, 620 foot-pounds of torque. You can see curve is very, very similar. As long as you keep the boost consistent when you're running these things, then it will basically, the turbo combination will mirror the power curve of the NA combination. So cam and a turbo at low boost, works very well. But okay, what if I want to make lots of power? And the nice thing about this is, if you have a turbo that's designed to make lots of power, let's say you have an 800 or a 900 or 1,000 horsepower turbo, you can make that amount of power. You can make that amount of power with a camshaft like this very, very easily. Here's what happened when we ran 17 pounds on this thing. Push peak power up to 923 horsepower. Peak torque was up to 886 foot-pounds, and this is as high as the boost that we ran for this particular test. You could continue to go up, you could put multiple turbos on it. It's just multiplying what's there naturally aspirated. So as you can see, 5.3 liter with ring gap and head studs and good injectors and that kind of stuff. Put a decent camshaft in it and then add boost to it. Obviously, everything works. Okay, the final illustration for what's it worth on turbo LS motors. We're going to take a look at one of the Big Bang motors. Now, I've run a bunch of these. I ran a 4.8, a 5.3, a Gen 3. All those were Gen 3, and a Gen 3 6.0. And this is on the Gen 4 6 liter. So we started off with a 6 liter. This was to illustrate how much you could make with a stock bottom end motor. So just from the wrecking yard, stock block, stock crank, stock rod, stock pistons. We even reused the stock rings. We just put extra ring gap in it. And that was on a 2008 6 liter LY6. We upgraded the combination other than the stock short block. We put a different camshaft in it. We put a BTR Stage 3 twin turbo cam. We also added ported heads, in this case Trick Flow Gen X 225s. We put a Holley Race Sniper on it and a fast 92 millimeter throttle body. We put large injectors on it, and then we ran, we'll talk about the twin turbo setup that we actually ran on this. But we ran the motor as we always do. We ran it naturally aspirated before adding the turbos. And this 6 liter combination produced 548 horsepower, and peak torque checked in at 462 foot-pounds of torque. So here's what happened when we added our turbo setup. You can see we got huge gains already. I'm going to go ahead and move myself up here in the corner so we can look at these curves a little bit better. So this was at 14.4 pounds, and our turbo system for this combination consisted of twin S475 turbos. We had our DNA long tube, or they're kind of long tube headers feeding our twin S475s. We had 2 TurboSmart wastegates. We had our dual in, single out with 2 cores for the air to water intercooler. We were running ice water on it. We ran race gas on this, and not E85, which I'd kind of like to try, but we ran race gas on this. And we had, it says 120 pound injectors, or I think that they're actually 150 or 160 pound injectors. So we ran 14.4 pounds, and we were already up over 1,000 horsepower. We were at like 1,070, and peak torque checked in at 868 horsepower. And what we did for this is we just kept going up in boost to try to find out how much the cast crank, the powdered metal rods, and the cast pistons and the stock block would take. And so we started out at 14.4 pounds. Here's the power curve at 17 pounds. We're talking about 1,213 horsepower and 957 foot-pounds of torque. Then we upped the boost to 22 pounds. And we actually went up in different stages in this, but I'm just including some of them. 1,349 horsepower and 1,084 foot-pounds. 26 pounds brought us 1,433 horsepower and 1,196 foot-pounds of torque. And then our final run, where we basically ran out of a map sensor because we only had a 3-bar map sensor on this thing. We ran 29.2 pounds, 1,543 horsepower, and 1,255 foot-pounds of torque. So you can see this is one of the great things. Not that I would recommend you trying to build a 1,500 horsepower stock bottom-end motor and taking it out of racing, because it's probably not going to last very long. But it does go to show you how nice turbo combinations can be, and how much of a big change in power we can get by obviously going up in boost, assuming that we have enough turbo. In our case, we had two S475 turbos, so we had nearly 2,000 horsepower worth of turbos to play with. And when you got a good motor and you got lots of turbo and you got the tuning right and you got a nice air-to-water intercooler with ice water on something, you can make a ton of power. Armature holder, please make sure, like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff, and I'll keep testing.